now. Jay, the floor is yours.
Cool, then I will kick off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Academic Fringe Festival. I'm Jay again, assistant professor in the Web Information Systems group at TU Delft. I'm also a co-director of the Delft AI Lab Design at Scale, which is also the theme of this speakers series, Design at Scale with Human AI Collaboration. So in this speaker series, we discuss ways to combine the creative power of humans with the analytical capabilities of machines in the design and development of systems for tackling societal challenges. Now, this week, I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, Vanessa Murdock. Vanessa is a well-known figure in information retrieval, and I had a chance to work with her as a colleague and a manager at, her being a manager of me at Amazon. Vanessa leads a research team in Alexa Shopping at Amazon, focusing on recommender systems, search, AR, VR, and HCI. Her team provides the machine learning that backs Amazon choice. And previously, Vanessa worked at Microsoft as a principal scientist, working on location inference and notifications at Bing and Cortana. Prior to Amazon, Vanessa also led the Geographic Context and Experience Group at Yahoo Research in Barcelona, doing research on topics related to geographic information retrieval and user-generated content. So without further ado, let's welcome Vanessa. Thanks a lot, Vanessa, for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Today that I wanted to talk about quality, and the reason that I'm talking about quality because it's super important when we're thinking of e-commerce. Mostly it's important because we want to sell people things that they consider to be high quality so that they don't send them back. So when we sell people things, we like them to keep them. So that's basically what my talk is about today. Let me just let me share my screen. Okay, so the quality is interesting because you would think everybody here knows what quality means. We have a sort of a working definition in our brains of quality, and so when we look that up online, there's sort of a laundry list of definitions for quality. So one definition is that it's a peculiar and essential characteristic of an item. So for instance, you might say that the second sonata has an ethereal quality. It can be an inherent feature, such as the sauce is thick and buttery. It is a degree of excellence, which is somehow how we often think of it, which is today's air quality score is 85. It could mean superiority, as in this is our best quality coffee maker. It can be a distinguishing attribute, so she possesses many fine qualities, and it can be an adjective of being of high quality. And the reason that we mention all of these definitions is because they all contribute to, the whole in total contributes to our understanding of quality. So we think of something as a degree of excellence, or it's a measure of goodness, but we also think of it as relating to a particular character of a product. So as I said, we care about that because we want to sell people high quality items. And in particular, Amazon's choice, the goal there is to identify items that are high quality from among, the wall of products that you see when you are looking at search results. We also don't want people to return products. Return products are a huge problem. They're a problem for the environment because most of them end up in landfill. And they're a problem for the sellers of those items because they take a hit in terms of shipping costs. The other cost of the environment that people don't often mention is the transport cost of all those things going to and from a place. So we really would like to decrease the number of returns, and therefore we want to focus on quality items. So I do want to say that this is primarily the work of Eyal Krikon in my group, and then also on the project are David Carmel, Sandeep Avula, and Barbara Poblete, and myself. So thinking about quality, if we say something is good quality, what do we mean? We mean that it exemplifies some particular attribute of interest, like it tastes good or it smells nice. It is performant, it makes good coffee, it toasts bread evenly, it's a vacuum that picks up dog hair. It's durable. We could mean it's durable. Like, for instance, I used to have a Honda Civic that I drove for about 300,000 miles, or it's 100 years old and still holds its pitch. It is reliable, it is trusted, it is usable, it is useful. These are all things that we mean when we say quality. We also want to know, if we're going to talk about quality, we also want to define what it means to exemplify an attribute. So we can say a product has an attribute, but how do we know that it's a good exemplar? And how do we know that a product actually has that attribute? So for instance, how do we know that a vacuum picks up dog hair? And is it a good example of a vacuum that picks up dog hair? And then also the other thing we need to know is what does it mean for one thing to be better than another thing? So we're going to talk about those. That's basically the roadmap of the talk today. So what does it mean to exemplify an attribute? So we had the definition of peculiar and essential character or inherent feature. So I like to turn to philosophy when I'm looking for definitions for things because I think they're smarter than I am, and it's been 1,000 years or so, 2,000 years, 3,000 years. So Aristotle said that one and the self-same qualities, while retaining its identity, is capable of admitting contrary qualities. So what he was talking about there is that you may have something that is, one time warm and another time cold, or perceived warm by somebody and perceived cold by another. And that's the idea from John Locke, is that you may have, the quality is some notion of a sensation or perception. And when Locke talked about quality, he's talking about a characteristic of an object. So he's really talking about what is intrinsic to the object that can never change, and what is a quality that is a property of perception. And he was trying to decide between these two things. So Aristotle noted that something that may have a characteristic, the characteristic can change. It can be warmer, it can be cold, it can be blacker, it can be white, it can be large, it can be small. And John Locke noted that that's a matter of perception. Whether you consider something heavy or light, or whether you consider something large or small, is really a matter of your own personal understanding of what that should be. And there are some primary qualities that never change. For instance, humans are apes, all matter is composed of atoms. Those things are unchanging. But for other things like color, size, temperature, those things are all qualities that are a matter of perception. So then what does it mean to be a good example? So we're talking here about the notion of quality that is a degree of excellence. So there's a notion of good simpliciter, which is like something is a universal good. Education is good. So what we mean by that is that morally, we believe that education is the right way to go. But we can't really talk about that with products. So blenders are good. Blenders are neutral in the spectrum of good and evil. So we don't really have a good simpliciter for products. We have the notion of something being good for. So a blender is good for crushing ice. So we can't really say that it is good from the point. So if we're talking about, in this case, good for is good for from a point of view. So from the point of view of somebody who wants to crush ice, a blender is good at crushing ice. So if you were talking about good simpliciter in that sense, you could say that it's good from every point of view in the universe, or all of those things put together if we knew all of that. So when we say it's a good blender, that's what we're really talking about, is that for any given viewpoint, or for any good thing that you want to use this blender for, any person would consider this a good thing. And then there's this notion of relational good, which is that it's good relative to a purpose or end goal. So if we say that it's good for making cocktails, or it's good for, so a blender that's good for crushing ice is we don't just want to crush ice, we want to use the crushed ice for things. So the blender is good for making snow cones, it's good for making margaritas, that type of thing. So that's relational good. And that's an important concept here, because when we're talking about product quality, we really always want to consider what is the end use of that product. And then there's this idea of good first theory, which is that the blender is better than most among comparable items. So this is an interesting idea, because when we're talking about, if we talk about a blender being a good blender, that means that if you take a sample of all blenders, it's better than most of them. But we don't have, when we're looking at an e-commerce site, we don't have a sample of all items. We really have what we're looking at on the search results page. And for most people, that's the first page of results. So we're talking about it's better than most among the first 10 or 20 blenders that a person might see. So that comes back to this idea of superiority in kind. So we have to then look at, what does it mean for one thing to be better than another? So, an object is perceived by its qualities. We know that a good object is better than most among comparable items, but how do we do the comparison? So for instance, blender A is 20 centimeters tall. It'll last for about 10 years. Blender B is 30 centimeters tall. It will last for about 15 years. Is blender B better than blender A because it's taller? No. So it's only better. We might consider it better because it's more durable, because it lasts longer. But the height in the case of the blender does not matter in general, unless we have to store it in some cabinet that's smaller than 30 centimeters. And then in that case, blender A is definitely better. So if that height is irrelevant, then it doesn't factor into the quality. So this means that when we're comparing products, or if you're ranking them, or if you yourself are making the comparison, or if we're trying to select for you a good quality item, we have to know the context of that comparison. So when we're talking about blenders, we have to know whether height is important to you specifically, not in general, but to you specifically, or durability, is that important to you specifically? So that means that for any product attributes that we look at, we have to decide, are these attributes relevant or not to the context that you are searching in? So this, just to sum up that whole part, that the problem with quality is, or the challenge of quality is that it's high quality only in relation to some end goal. So the blender's only good if you're making margaritas. It's not good if you're making, I don't know, hollandaise sauce or some other thing. To be a good exemplar, it's better than most among comparable items. So that means that we have to know both the context of the comparison and the universe of things that it can be compared to. And if the context is not known, then we have to assume a general definition, which is that, you know, given all purposes for the object and all contexts in which we might want to do that comparison, that it stands up, that it's better than most for all of those things. So when we're looking at e-commerce specifically, we can really break this down into two things. We're really talking about product quality. So we're thinking of this as like the manufacturing quality, the quality inherent to the product. And then there's the information quality, because e-commerce is online. And so we have this problem that nobody can touch or handle the things that they are purchasing, and they can't try them out. Remember, we don't want them to return them. So there's this notion of try before you buy. That's a tough one, because if we don't want people to return them, they can't try them and then buy them. So product quality is one stream. And when we talk about product quality, we're saying, what are the distinguishing features? What is its utility or performance? How durable is it? How reliable is it? And how usable is it? Those are all things in the product quality domain. But people are relying on information quality because they only have the online representation of that item. So how good is the representation? Does the product have, or the brand have, a good reputation? Is it popular? Do we trust it? And so all of those things matter, because the product quality is what you might say about the actual item. The information quality is what we know about it when we make a purchase. So, oh, that's interesting. If we talk about going to the product quality area, so this seems like the area where we could really nail things down, because we know we have a physical object, we know what the attributes of that object are, we know things like what material it was made out of, what company produced it. We could dive deep on the manufacturing process of that company and see, you know, do they measure up to standards, et cetera. But it's actually become, and that's in fact when we were starting to look at quality, we thought, well, what we'll just do is we need a ground truth. So our ground truth will be, you know, maybe one of our standards bodies like ISO, or there's a NIST standards, there's Six Sigma standards and so forth. So we thought, okay, great. So let's just find all the companies that meet the ISO standard, and then we'll find their products. So before we go into that, I wanted to go through a little bit of the history of product quality, because it turns out that just looking at the standard is actually not enough to tell us whether it's a good quality item. So initially we had, like, considering thousands of years ago, we had a guild system, and the guild system enforced this standard of workmanship. And it established an extensive training process to ensure that people who made these objects were competent. And then it monitored the city government. And one of the privileges of being in the guild was that you were allowed to sell items within the city walls. And the guild would put their stamp on the bottom of each of these items that you manufactured. So when people bought them, they know that they conform to a certain understanding of a product quality. And then, you know, by monitoring the city government, they made sure that the government didn't allow sort of things to sneak in there that were poor quality. Then much later, much more recently, the Industrial Revolution came along, And in that case, when you think about it, the Industrial Revolution brought the first example where we had two exactly identical items. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, you could not have two identical items because each item was handmade. There was no mass production. So now we can have two identical items. Then we have this notion of conformity. So standards bodies are really measuring whether you conform to a standard and whether all of the items that you produce are all the same. And that measuring that started in the 40s, although the notion of it started much earlier. And so when we're talking about mass producing items, we're really talking about just the whole focus was to just generate a lot of these items, not necessarily with high quality. So initially, mass produced items are considered to be low quality, but they've become much better. And now we actually, mass production is the way we go. We almost never go to a seamstress, for instance, to have a shirt made. The government standards bodies measure these reliability and conformity. That started in the 40s. And the whole focus is on uniformity in the manufacturing processes. So you may remember, I don't know if I have a slide on this, some people will remember the 80s, there was this focus on total quality management. And the idea was that if you ran a factory and you had to conform to standards for everything that you manufactured, that it was easier to maintain those standards or maintain the conformity if every part of that process was standardized. So everything from what the line worker does to what the CEO and the management does across the entire company would conform to the same set of processes or to an established set of processes, and everybody would do things the same way. And this would increase the conformity, and also, because conformity to a standard is supposed to ensure some notion of reliability or durability. So that's where we're really coming from with quality. So when we talk about things like, measuring against a standard, the standard doesn't tell us whether it's good quality. It doesn't tell us whether it serves a purpose that we have. It doesn't tell us whether it has bells and whistles and features that we're looking for. It only says there was a standard that was established by a standards body, and this product conforms to it. We don't know whether that is a good standard. We just know that it is a standard, and that everything that is manufactured according to that standard will be the same. So after the 40s, there started to be this notion of post-war mass marketing. So television came along, radio became kind of a big thing. And so there was this focus on advertising and images and presenting the bells and whistles of a product. So instead of just selling a vacuum cleaner, you sold a vacuum cleaner that had a lot of features on it. And so we could describe the features, there was advertising and images. And so then that became sort of the focus of quality, is does it have features? There was the disability rights movement, which focused on form factor and usability. So the notion of something being very usable or having a good form factor or being accessible didn't come around until, I would say, the 60s, when the disability rights movement came along. And then, as I was mentioning, this notion of total quality management, which was pioneered in Japan, which was all about uniformity of the production processes and the management processes, which led to things like Agile and Scrum, which we are familiar with. Those all came around in the 70s. So we're really, really talking about very recent developments in terms of quality. So we started with this guild system, which said that everybody had to be trained and the things they produced were pretty good, according to some personal notion of, or accepted notion in the guild of what that meant. And then we moved to mass production, where the notion of quality was really on reliability and conforming to a standard, where the standards determine things like the length within a tolerance, or the height within a tolerance, or the thickness within a tolerance, and so forth. And then that moved on to sort of this notion of features being important to quality. What does the thing do? And then does it have a form factor? Is it usable? And then sort of totally conforming to this thing. So we are able to standardize and measure and regulate most things that are in production now. So most things that are produced we are able to actually do that. Like, we can say these shirts are this size. We can say, the cotton that they were made out of is this weight, and so forth. Even with poor quality products, there is some way to measure most of those. So it seems like that would be all we need to measure quality. Like, we would only need to know, what is the thread count of the cotton sheet? What is the thickness of the metal, in our French press? what is the durability of the plastic that we made our coffee grinder out of? All of those things are all that we need. But actually, that's not true. Unfortunately, that was not true. And we were very sad about that, I have to say, because it meant that we did not have some sort of objective ground truth that we could turn to. And furthermore, when we went to look to see, oh, well, we'll just find all the ISO products. There's no list of ISO products anywhere. There's no list of NIST products. There's no list of Six Sigma products. So unless a product says, oh, yes, we conform to the Six Sigma standards, there's no way to tell. And so there's no way to gather that data and find all of these things that we might want to use to measure quality. There's no way to do that. We would have to ourselves go mine that. There's no central repository. Nobody is actually measuring whether a company conforms to those standards or not. And we saw that here. A good example of that is in the pandemic, in the United States, we had a shortage of N95 masks. N95 masks are NIOSH certified. So if they're not NIOSH certified, they are not N95 masks, even if they say that they are. And so there was this huge push to produce, random masks and call them N95 because people were desperate. So you had to then look for the NIOSH standard. And you could take that NIOSH standard and you could actually enter your number on your mask and verify that it was in fact registered with NIOSH. So you could do that for your individual masks, but there was no way for anyone to say, verify for the things that are being sold, whether they were compliant to that standard or not. And that was a huge problem because, on Amazon, suppose that we wanted to get rid of all of the masks that were not NIOSH standards, which we definitely were interested in doing. There was no way for us to really do that because we would have to have each individual mask have the number, look it up in the, there was just no way to go about doing that. And that was really unfortunate. So what people did instead is they kind of got the word out through the media that you have to look for the NIOSH standards. So the other thing is that if a mask says it's N95 and it is not NIOSH standards, they are not breaking the law by calling it an N95 mask. They can call it an N95 mask because this is not a question of a legal precedent. This is a question of voluntary conformity to that standard. So that's one problem. Then the other problem is what we were talking about before, which is this quality is completely dependent on perception. John Locke knew that, we know that the customer's context determines how you would compare the values of these comparable products. What you might think is a good quality item is not the same as what I might think is a good quality item. And then the other thing is that given that all of our perceptions and context matter so much, the e-commerce system has no idea what this is. We have no way to understand that, to measure it, to store it, to use that information in any way. We can know some things, like we can know what your session history was, but we don't know, like, are you a person that really prefers, glass decanters to metal? Unless you've, made a lot of purchases of glass decanters, we won't know that. So we can't know your context. Like, you might say that you're searching for a blender to make margaritas, but you might have some other thing in mind that you actually are not telling us that's not in your search query. And we know search queries are 2 or 3 words. They are never an adequate representation of what the customer's actual need is. They're just a little 2 or 3 word snippet of what the customer thinks they can find. So not only do we not know your context, we can't define any universal ground truth or even estimate that with annotators. So instead, what we're left with is we have to go for proxies for product quality. And the proxies are things that capture the customer's perception of the quality, such as the purchases, the returns, and the reviews. And this is important because we have a lot of literature that's looking at, measuring purchases, returns, and reviews. But what we really want to say is, what do those things indicate about the quality of a product? Given that we can't measure it for the ground truth, we can't annotate it with annotators, and maybe we don't even really know exactly. We can't quite put our finger on it. So we're down to the information quality. So this is the point I was making earlier, is that since you can't touch and hold an item before you make this decision to purchase it, you're really just limited by exactly what you can see on the screen. So it's a matter of perception, and quality is contextual. So this idea is that we are actually completely dependent on the quality of the information that we see. So the information that we see are things like, from the seller, we see the product creatives and descriptions, we see images, sometimes there are videos, There are often expert reviews. Those can be quite helpful. Sometimes the expert reviews are not from experts we trust. So there's another issue there. Do we trust the expert reviewer? From the customers, we have product questions and answers. We have customer reviews, and we have social recommendations from our friends. So this is all in the e-commerce space. There's physical shopping. Of course, we can go to the store and look at things. But if we're talking about only the online portion of this, once you go to the store, you're not in an e-commerce setting anymore. And if you go to the store to look at the item and then you come back to buy it online, it's probably for a price comparison or something, but that's still not considered fully e-commerce shopping. That's really in-store shopping in that case. So we're really limiting ourselves to what we see and do online. Okay, so looking at the information, there's this notion of information actually being helpful. So this is a little bit of a diversion. So when we're looking at quality of information, we want to make sure that the information is actually helpful. But if we're looking at that seller information, we have the title, the description, the images and videos, and so forth. So if it's helpful, the product should be informative and easy, or the title should be informative and easy to understand. The description is complete. The images are clear. They adequately represent the product. The expert reviews are complete and they're fresh. They're not stale. They're not from 3 years ago. They're from recently. And contextually helpful means that it serves the customer's specific need and it's accessible to the customer. So, if I'm talking about, buying a blender, if I need it to crush ice, the information is only helpful if it describes how the product crushes ice. And it's only helpful if it's accessible to the customer. So if for instance, I'm sight impaired and I can't read that description because it's too small, then it's not helpful. And similarly, if I have to scroll through the detail page 5 miles down to find, the customer review that I'm looking for, that's also, I would argue, not very accessible and therefore not very helpful. Speaking of which, customer information. So the helpful reviews are those that are current and summarized with star ratings and other metrics. They contain meaningful information. The customer generated content distinguishes opinion from fact, which can be quite difficult to know. And then contextually speaking, they address a specific concern that you yourself has, so that when you're reading that, it really resonates with you, with your need, with your context, with your personal preferences. So this is the diversion: relevant versus helpful versus true. So remember that information can be relevant but not helpful. So if you have a question such as, does the toothbrush come with a pink case? And the answer is the toothbrush is pink. That's great, but we were asking about the case, so it's not relevant. It may be helpful. It's not helpful, and it is relevant because it's about the toothbrush and the toothbrush being pink, but it's not helpful. And then information may be true but not helpful, which is the toothbrush easy for a person with arthritis to use? And the toothbrush maybe, the toothbrush is lighter than previous models. That is true, but it doesn't tell us whether it's easy for a person with arthritis. It hints at that because lighter objects very often are easier for people with arthritis, but it doesn't tell us specifically that this one is good for arthritis. And then it can also be helpful, but not relevant. So for instance, a question like, is the toothbrush rechargeable? And the answer is the company will not take returns, all sales are final. That is certainly helpful information to know, but not relevant to the question. So this intersection between relevant, helpful, and true is important as we're thinking about how these descriptions can be helpful to customers. So the next part of I have to say, I'm sorry to say that the really interesting part of the talk was just now. The reason that I think that was the interesting part of the talk is because when you start to think about what is a good quality item, I think in information retrieval, we need to go beyond what is relevant. So there's a lot of discussion of what relevance means. We have a lot of metrics that approximate or estimate relevance. We don't have a lot of work in utility, helpfulness, and quality. And I think that when we talk about something like quality or helpfulness or usefulness, we really need to look at what that definition means. And I think that the community actually is going to need to go into this space in order to really function in a world that is very, very much online. And when we're talking about things like quality, we're not just talking about the physical product, which is what we're concerned with, but also the information quality in general across the board. So these things of defining relevance, quality, utility, relevance got a lot of attention in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And there was a lot of work put into the community deciding what relevance meant and how to measure it. And I think we need to do the same thing with quality, not just product quality, but information quality. And we see that when we look at any online forum, like there is so much information out there and so much of it is terrible. Some of it is harmful. Some of it is simply not true. Some of it is slightly misleading, or it's just poor quality in general and kind of a waste of time. So this is my plea for people to work on quality, information quality in particular. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the work in Alexa Shopping that has that relates to various types of information quality, helping people with information that they can see online. So the first thing is identifying helpful sentences in product reviews. So product reviews are interesting because they often tell us things that the customers know about a product that the product itself does not reveal or does not maybe measure. So for instance, in the previous example, a toothbrush, whether it's good for arthritis. So the product will put the weight on there. It will give information about how to use the toothbrush perhaps, or you'll see images of people holding it, but it doesn't usually tell you this is a toothbrush specifically good for arthritis, because they want to sell to a larger community. So they don't mention that. They don't want to make claims about it because there may be legal repercussions to making that kind of claim, or just bad PR. So the customers will tell you that, though. If you look at the reviews, they'll say things like, yeah, I got this for my 4-year-old, he loves it, or this is great for arthritis, my 80-year-old mother loves it, or they will tell you things like the vacuum is great for picking up dog hair, and they'll tell you things it's not good for as well. So very often we find information in the customer reviews that are only available from the customers. So when you want to make those helpful sentences, when you want to extract them, in particular for a voice interface, you want a short version of these helpful sentences, and you want to make sure that they're representative of the reviews in general, and you want to make sure that they're helpful for making a purchase decision. So they're relevant to the person's context, they answer the question the customer has, they are in general true about the product, and information that's helpful and important. So what Yvetak et al. Did was they curated a collection of review sentences that represented 6 product categories. And then they asked crowd workers to assess how helpful each sentence was, and they averaged the score. So then they had a ground truth with these composite scores of helpfulness from the annotators. And the task was to predict a helpfulness score with a supervised algorithm. So here's an example of a helpful sentence. So you have a product like a toy pirate ship. A representative sentence is, it's easy to put together, it's the perfect height and very durable. Speakers, good quality, price okay, sound output great. So notice that one component of this is not that the helpful sentences need to be grammatical. It's sometimes helpful if they are, but it's not necessary. So context matters. So for instance, if the product is a Harry Potter book, finding one book that keeps your child intrigued and helps him or her develop a love for reading is amazing. So the context here is trying to help a child learn to read, and that's what the sentence refers to. Or jump rope. It's a pretty standard jump rope, but it's really nice that you can adjust the length because I'm really short. And I personally have this problem. I bought a jump rope and it's too long. I can't actually swing it high enough to actually be able to swing it. So, that the context there is that the person is short, and so they need a jump rope that can be adjustable or that's the right length. So if we're talking about that helpful sentence, it's helpful because it gives you the context of the height of the person. So some details. So in this work, each example was annotated by 10 crowd workers. And in the test data, it was annotated by each example was annotated by 30 crowd workers, because there's just so much noise given the subjective nature of the task and the nature of crowdsourcing. And then they also decided on 30 votes because they noticed when they annotated with more that the evaluation the reliability of the evaluation leveled off at 30 votes. So they just stopped at that. These helpful sentences had an inter-annotator agreement of 0.44 of the Pearson correlation on the training set and 5.7 on the test set. So they did get a little bump from annotating the test set with more workers. However, I would note that, 0.44 is acceptable, but it's not like stunningly high. And I think it's because of the variance in what people will decide is helpful. So they compared 4 models here. So they had a random selection of words from a review. They had the TF-IDF version. They did a ridge regression on this sentence transformers embedding, and then they also had a fine-tuned BERT model. And BERT did the best. It was very close to the ridge regression on the sentence transformers in terms of NDCG. So looking at some more examples, the other way to extract helpful sentences is to use something like abstractive summarization, which is how this has been done in the past. So this is just a comparison of the types of sentences that you come up for a single product. So in this case, the product is a pair of sandals. And the helpful sentences, these things are fun, festive, flexible, and surprisingly comfortable. And you could imagine that being read out on a voice prompt, and it would be perfectly fine to hear that much text. If you had the human summary or the human choice of the best sentence or the best review or the best snippet, it's very, very long. And so you can imagine trying to listen to this on Alexa, and it would be enraging. For me personally, it would be enraging. I could not listen to this amount of text on Alexa. And then if you look at the summarized version, it's a little bit shorter than the human selection, but it's still pretty long. And they are helpful, but they're just too long and maybe have a lot of information that isn't quite as, maybe it's not as important. So the next thing is voice-based reformulation of community answers. And the reason we might want to reformulate those community answers is because if you think about helpful information on the website, people ask questions and answer them, and those question answers are often extremely useful. However, the answers are often very verbose, and you can't just read those out loud. So if you wanted to enable Alexa to use these question answers in her information about a product, you're going to need to summarize that answer in some way. So basically, the idea here is that they were not just abstracting a helpful sentence from the answer, but rather reformulating the answer so that it is still a good answer, but that it's much more succinct. So the idea of the challenges that voice interfaces pose is that you can imagine matching a customer spoken question to a text-based community question answer pair. It's not exactly, there's an ASR problem there, and then there's also just the general ranking problem of finding the right question. People can ask a lot of things on Alexa, and it's not the case always that the corpus is large enough to match all of those. And on voice, I would argue that things have to be very, very precise, because if you get a match to a question that's only tangentially related, it will be really annoying on voice, whereas it's not quite as annoying on the web just because it's more ignorable. The answer has to be presented succinctly so that it can be heard. And then the non-voice friendly content, such as images and URLs, have to be either represented in some way or maybe ignored, or maybe you have a multimodal device where you can show an image. So you have to decide what you're going to show and what you're not going to show and so forth. So the idea that they have is that they want to reformulate the answers to be voice friendly. So they pre-process the text to remove non-textual content such as images and emoticons. And then they split long answers into sentences and extract a summary of up to 55 words. So they did a couple things. They used BERT, enriched with a large set of manually engineered features. They used Stack Exchange for their corpus, and they looked at about 2,000 answers from Stack Exchange that had been manually annotated. And in this case, a training example is a question, a long answer, and a short answer. And then only answers marked as accepted by the asker with upvotes at least 3 sentences and more than 55 words. So in there, they were only using the data from Stack Exchange that had identified that the answer actually answered the question by the person asking the question. So self-explanatory question titles were selected via annotations to resemble voice questions. And that's a key limitation of the study, because actually these question titles, limiting to the ones that are self-explanatory is a little bit tricky. And it's not clear that those would always resemble voice questions. So we'll see some examples. And then the short version of the answers were selected by the annotators. So here's an example of a question. Are there any English sayings equivalent to the Japanese proverb, go to bed early and wait for the good news? And the answer, the succinct answer, is a washed pot never boils. Of course, if you give that answer, it's helpful sometimes to give a little bit of context around it so that it's clear that the system understood what you were actually asking for and is not just returning a random proverb. So, there is the question answering about making the answer trustable in addition to correct. So, so the idea for the question for the assessors was, given this question and this answer, they were supposed to select the sentence that individually answers the question best, and then answer the question clearly and independently, And then furthermore, to mark all sentences that should appear in a very concise and direct answer to the question, so that in case the sentence with the answer in it isn't enough, they can annotate more. And so here are the results. So the best model is a sequence tagging approach. So each sentence paired with a question is input to BERT, and the first output token, which is an embedding, is concatenated with manually engineered features. And then a sequence of augmented embeddings were passed to a BiLSTM, and then a CRF tags each sentence as relevant or not. So the lead sentence is the first sentence in the question, in the answer to the question. There's sequence BERT here, and then the upper bound is suppose that the system always managed to pick the right answer according to the annotations, what would the results be? And this is important because the precision you'll notice in the upper bound is only 57. So when we're doing a task like this, if you get a result like 46, it's pretty questionable whether that's good until you realize the upper bound that you could possibly get is 57, and then it looks a lot better. So so there's that. And yeah, so those are two works that look at ways to find to extract high quality information from the website. Then the next thing is we looked at how do people perceive quality. So this is work that was done by 2 interns in our group. One was Felipe Moraes, who you may know, and the other is Gustavo Penha. And so we were looking at how people understand quality. So are there product attributes that are proxies for quality? What type of information do people look at? And then there's also other work that is, why do people buy non-relevant items? We noticed in the data, there was a study that was done by David Carmel and some others, where they were noticing that people were buying items that were clearly not relevant to their query, and they wanted to know why. So they did a little story of that. And then this is Gustavo's work on voice. Is it better to represent a product comparison as opposed to a single point of information? So in terms of this, the role of attributes in product quality comparison. So this was a paper that was published at Cheer. And basically what we did was we were trying to find what are, whether when making a product comparison or when deciding on the quality of an item, what is it that people look at on the detail page? What are the attributes they consider? Do they look at the reviews? Do they care about what other reviewers say? Do they look at the star ratings, et cetera? Or does the image quality matter, et cetera, et cetera? So in order to do that, we set up this comparison interface. However, we wanted to do a side-by-side comparison, and there became this problem of what is comparable. So for instance, if you're asking people to compare 2 headphones, like maybe a Bose on-ear noise canceling wireless headphones that are about $350, it's not really fair to give them then a comparison like Skull Candy earbuds that are $15. Those aren't comparable. One would argue that they're not the same product. They don't have the same use. They don't have the same, you wouldn't buy them for the same purpose. You'd buy them for different purposes. So they're not comparable. So then what is comparable? So we ended up with, if you're going to talk about something like noise canceling on-ear headphones that are $350, then the comparable product should be around the same price point and the same style of things. So on-ear headphones and so forth. So the way that we did this, because we couldn't just sit down and go through the catalog and find, pairs of products. So we took Felipe, what he came up with was he took the product that was clicked and another that was purchased in the same search session. So if somebody is searching for headphones, they look at one headphone, they look at another, and they purchase only one of those 2. So then we consider those 2 to be comparable. Oh, by the way, GA's on this paper. I forgot to mention that. So this was GA's project, actually. He set this up with Felipe. So they had that crowdsourced, annotated by crowdsourced workers, 420 of them. They looked at 946 product pairs, and they had 10 workers for each pair. And then the second question they asked were, what sources of information do people turn to? So in that part of the study, they asked people to choose which was the better product, A or B. And then the second question was, what source of information do people look at to assess the quality? And so in that case, they presented the product pairs, the top 5 reviews, the top 3 question answers, and then they measured the engagement with all of the different sources in the study. And then the final question was, what attributes can people consider when they're looking at quality? So we looked at a list of attributes from the catalog information and some from the reviews, and then we asked them to identify which contributed to their assessment. Here's what the interface looked like. So here we have the Sony product and the Bose product. And you can see that they have all the information needed there. So we've taken it outside of any Amazon or eBay or any other e-commerce interface. And we've just provided the information that the product has. So in this case, it's the title, the image, the price, and then the description from the product itself, which is this bulleted lists about this product. And then they could open up the question answers, they could open up the reviews, et cetera, at the bottom. And then the questionnaire here asks if the products are similar, whether they've have any experience with these products before, have they purchased them before, which one is better quality, and then which are the attributes that tell them that answer, and then an open response for any additional attributes or additional comments, and then their confidence. So in terms of catalog attributes, it was mostly the product title and description, and then attributes such as color, size, and weight and price. And then from the reviews, we chose the star rating, the number of reviews, the number of answered questions. And then we automatically extracted some terms like noise cancellation or battery life or good sound quality, sort of key phrases from the reviews that people might consider important attributes. So people did not look, even though people do look at the reviews on the website and they consider those to be important, they did not actually engage with the buttons for reviews and question answers in the study. Very few people actually opened those up and looked at them. They did choose more review-based attributes than catalog attributes in the study. So if you remember the laundry list of items that were in there, that we had a mix of catalog attributes and review attributes in there, and people did tend to pick the review-based attributes, which supports my hypothesis, or our hypothesis, that the information that's in the reviews that's given by customers is extremely important because it covers attributes that are not covered by the catalog and that people really value. And then the other thing that was kind of interesting is that those crowd workers who identified as frequent shoppers or frequent online shoppers had a higher agreement in terms of the attributes chosen. So people who are less familiar with online shopping were not as consistent in terms of which attributes they consider. So then the question is there a proxy for quality? So is there some thing that we can use that we could say, okay, we don't know the quality of this item, but here's a signal that we could use for that? Partly because we're still looking for a ground truth. We still have this problem in general, and it's an unsolved problem still, that when we're looking at all these products, we don't have a ground truth for what's quality. So anything that we come up with where we're trying to predict the quality of something, we don't know if it's correct or not, which is a big problem actually. So we extracted this set of features from the product catalog and the customer purchase data, and then computed the relative perceived quality of a product pair. So this is the percentage of annotations in the product, which was in product I, which was preferred to product J. And then for each feature extracted, we would compute the relative value of that feature. So where Q is the corresponding feature value for the product. There we go. So then the question, again, remember the question is there a proxy for quality? So we looked at the correlation between all of these various metrics here that might be candidates for proxies for quality across these product catalog product types: beauty, electronics, home, kitchen, and office products. So we looked at the Spearman correlation between each of these things. So we found that price and product creative length, so how long is the description, for instance, correlate with people's perception of quality. And then review rating and the number of reviews was surprisingly not as much, which is interesting because most of us, when we say what we do with the reviews, we're like, we look at the rating and the number of reviews, but it doesn't seem to be that people actually consider that as quality. It's not correlated enough with quality to use as a proxy. And then purchase preference does not also correlate as strongly as price. So customers were asked, would you buy this? Which one would you buy? And they did not necessarily choose the high quality item. Very often they chose the lower priced item. So this suggests that the consumers are making a trade-off between price and quality. I think it's also a product of the setup of the study where the products are very comparable. So the Bose headphones and the Sony headphones are essentially identical, except one would be slightly lower. And in that situation, people will choose the lower price. So the final thing was we looked at how well these are predictors if we train just a random forest regression model and to predict the perceived quality. What are the features that are most useful? And you can see here, price, of course, is a highly useful one, including the length of the title, the description, etc. So when people are searching, they sometimes buy irrelevant things. And there's a big question about why. And it's not that they always buy them. Sometimes they buy them or they have significant engagement. So they really look at them and study them. And these are items that are not relevant to the search, but that are related to the search. So for example, the query would be like, buy a burger, and it leads to purchases of a burger press, but not the burger patties. And so the question is why? So they came up with sort of a catalog of hypotheses. One would be the people's personal preference. So relevance is subjective. So maybe when they say buy burger, they really meant buy a burger press and they just called it a burger. So that item might be considered relevant. Popularity, sometimes if you get a tangentially related item and it's very popular, even if it's not relevant, it's still something you buy. So it's sort of like you're querying for something and you see an ad for Windex on sale and you're like, ah, yes, I need Windex, I'll purchase that. Sometimes people are in exploration mode. So the idea would be that people aren't actually engaged in buying a product. They're just engaged at looking at things. And in that case, they will want to see tangentially related things because it serves the exploration goal. And then sometimes some people are more tolerant of non-relevant results, and so they aren't bothered by seeing additional things in their search results because they're going to engage with them anyway. And then price is a significant factor, but the higher the price of the irrelevant item, the less likely it is to purchase. So we think that when people are looking at their results and they see an irrelevant item or non-relevant item, they'll if it's cheap, they'll buy it because it's kind of an impulse buying thing. And then the other is that these items have an indirect relation. So customers identify indirect relationships to the query. So for instance, in the burger example, I'm buying burgers, there's a burger press. So we can see that it's related. So it sort of gets relevance by association. So they did a bunch of experiments. They selected query product pairs from the voice purchase logs. And then the relevance was judged by majority vote of 3 annotators. And they considered customer actions such as ignore, add to cart, send to phone, and purchase. So recall on Alexa, if you ask Alexa to buy something, she'll often add it to your phone, send it to your phone so that you can look at it in your cart there. Sometimes you can just add it directly to your cart. So so in the case of add to cart, it was added to the shopping cart, but it was not purchased. And sent to phone, the item was added to the shopping cart on the phone as opposed to on the device. And then in exploration intent was determined by a black box classifier used by the search engine. So Amazon has a classifier that identifies where a person is in their shopping mission. So they'll know when you're in explore mode, and they'll know when you're in target finding mode when you have a thing that you want to buy. So there's some personal preferences. People are likely to reorder items even if they're irrelevant. So for instance, if you're shopping for a curling iron and dog food is presented to you and you buy dog food every week, you'll be like, oh yes, buy the dog food. There's this notion of popularity. Popularity does affect the purchase decision. So people do tend to buy more popular items. And then in exploration mode, people buy more irrelevant items, but they're not more engaged with irrelevant results. So that's interesting. So people who, that stands to reason. So people who are exploring are, they're not more engaged with irrelevant results than the other customers, but they will actually buy more relevant products because part of their exploration is sort of impulse buying. So in their analysis, they also found that customers engage more with irrelevant results when the query is less effective. So if they have some very short or very verbose queries, they're sort of expecting to get poor quality results, and so they'll engage more with those. And that's true especially in toys and digital products. And it may be that toys and digital products, these irrelevant items are actually interesting to look at. They're less engaged with irrelevant results in health, beauty, and grocery. And it's possible that people really are on a mission when they go to those categories, and so they're less likely to look around. They do tend to buy lower priced irrelevant items. And then they measured the indirect relationship by the semantic relatedness and also the purchase similarity. So if the items purchased in response for a query are similar, then they're considered indirectly related. So the less related a product is, the lower the purchase engagement is, which makes sense. So if you're querying for, burgers, the burger press might get some traction. You might be interested in that, but something completely unrelated like vacuum cleaner bags, probably not so much. So some recommendations that they came up with was other types of justification. So if you want to show something that's tangentially related, That's not just a mistake. It's not like the system thought the thing was unrelated, non-relevant, or didn't know that it was non-relevant. But in the case that you want to suggest something that's not what they're looking for, you can do it with a prompt that recognizes their personal preference. So you usually buy bananas while searching for avocados, or popularity. Bananas are very popular now. Lower price, identifying things that are on sale. Indirect relation, we see this a lot. People who buy X also buy Y. And then exploration mode, suggesting that people maybe want to try this other thing. So those were the recommendations that they make, is that you could offer justifications, which sort of softens the blow and gives some context to seeing the irrelevant results. And then the other, of course, is improving the ranker. So they have the same set of authors has a paper about multi-objective ranking. The idea is that classically learning to rank optimizes for purchases and clicks, whereas multi-objective ranking could also consider relevance and purchases and other types of engagement, such as add to cart. It could also consider things like the return rate and so forth, which would help you get a little better mix of products in the search results. And then this is the last piece of research that I was wanting to present today, and this is the work of Gustavo from your group. And then the idea is that he did two projects in his internship, actually, and they led to 2 short papers. This is the first of them. So the note here is that when you're on voice, that it matters how long that prompt is. It's really hard to hear a voice device say a lot of words. So the other thing that we noticed is that people typically evaluate 2 products because there's just limited real estate on the device. And on voice, people typically purchase low consideration items. So these are things like, that don't require a lot of product research. And part of that is because it's not easy to do product research on a voice device. Then the other thing is to remember is that customers really do value reviews as a source of information about quality, because they trust other people's assessment of that more than they trust the product's assertions itself. So model explanations can provide some insight into these recommender decisions. And so the question is whether it's helpful for a customer to hear a single review sentence describing a product, or hear a comparison of 2 products in the same prompt. So we did a crowdsourced study, and they were shown a query and an explanation. And then they were asked to judge the explanation with respect to 4 goals on a 4-point Likert scale. And each of these pairs was judged 3 times by level 2 workers for a total of 2,400 judgments. And for each query, the agreement was calculated over all queries, averaged over all queries, and it was Pearson correlation of 0.55. So pretty good agreement. So here's what it looks like. So the baseline, this is the current standard prompt from Alexa. So I found, if you're looking for, say, glitter lemon cupcake toppers or cupcake toppers, so her response would be, I found Lily Party 24-piece glitter lemon cupcake toppers fruits themed party, lemonade party decor. It's $9.99 with delivery in 3 days. So in my view, that's a lot of words, and I'm sure that's what she would say, but I'm wondering if that should be maybe shortened even more. But the point-wise information, because we're looking to include review information because people value customer reviews. So the point-wise information just gives a summary of what a reviewer said. So they're really cute and sturdy and added just the right touch. The pairwise version of that is that same sentence along with a comparison with a second product. So instead of presenting a single product in a review, we present 2 results and then 2 review summaries so that you can see both things. And we limited the amount of time that each of these prompts could take up. So it's not that we had unlimited length of time. We actually cut it off at a certain point. And then people were asked to judge the persuasiveness, the effectiveness, the transparency, and the scrutability. And so scrutability is allows the users to tell the system is wrong, so to understand that the system is wrong. So in this case, it's can you identify that the system misunderstood you, or that they that something went wrong in the whole process. So for instance, there was a time when I asked Alexa to add vanilla bean gelato to the shopping list, and she said, yes, I've added blah, blah, blah to the shopping list. And without I didn't quite understand what she said. And then when she showed me the item on the screen, and I could see that she had added millipede gelato. And so that's an example of scrutability. I could see that she messed that up, and I could determine that she did not understand what I was saying. And then another time I ordered maple sugar from the Alexa, and she had some incorrect data entered in her product description. So instead of 0 ounces, it said the letter O ounces. And so she read it as, do you want, maple sugar 12 OZ as opposed to 12 ounces. And since I could hear what she was doing and I could kind of figure it out, that was an example of another example of the system being scrutable. However, in that case, since it was voice only, it was a little less scrutable because I couldn't really see what she was doing. So persuasiveness is, does it convince the user to buy? Effectiveness is, it helps you make a good decision, not necessarily to buy, but a good decision for you. Transparency is, it explains how the system works, and scrutability is, it allows you to identify when the system is wrong. So in terms of the pairwise explanations, baseline pointwise versus pairwise, the pairwise explanations were better for everything except scrutability, where the pointwise was better. It's possible that the scrutability in the pointwise, it was just less information, so you could see more clearly where the system went wrong. When we looked at it further, the pairwise method is not more prone to error when there's more diversity, or when one product is cheaper, or when the query is more specific. So we were, oh, wow, every time I move my mouse, it does it. So we were actually, I just want to go back there. So yeah, so it was not the case that that these things were factors. So that's an important thing to know. So people do benefit from that pairwise explanation, but probably it needs to be quite short. So there we go. And that's everything.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Vanessa, for the great talk introducing also the amazing research of Alexa shopping at Amazon. Do we have any questions from the audience? You can simply, oh, Dennis, please go ahead. You can just open your mic.
Thanks. Thank you, Vanessa. I feel very energized about your talk. Thank you for that. My question is, so most of your examples are related to functional items, right? A blender, I don't know, like headsets, but we know that there are like non-functional informational goods like books, movies, something like that, which value is much more, complex than just a set of attributes. It can be relevant that people, sometimes satisfies in their decisions. They look for some sources of inspiration in their decision making. Like they ask friends what to buy. They ask some, I don't know, guides, some brands. So I guess my question is, like, what are your thoughts on how to tackle this complexity? How to tackle not this process of decision making based on attributes and like, I don't know, analyze it like in a more social context. I don't know. I'm not sure my question is clear, but
that's super interesting. Yeah, I agree. So the whole thing about context, right? So when you're buying a book or when you're buying clothing, it's not, you can't actually, like a book, you can't really just tell by looking at it. It's just all books look the same. They're square with a title, and there's not a lot you can do there. You can know the author, you can maybe read a summary of it, you could read a review of it, but it's not like more pictures of the book is going to help you in some way. So I think it is, I don't have an answer. I don't know how you would go about this, but I think it is really valuable to look at that social context. So if you could study, for instance, how people in a group recommend things to each other or decide to make purchases, how much of the group influence is there, I think that would be really interesting. And there have been proposals. I think in Amazon for a while, there was a community-based thing where people could put together collections of items. So for instance, if you want to go camping, what are the best items for camping, or what are the best items for cold weather camping? And it was kind of a community resource where people would just make these long lists of kits of items for things that you might do. And those all came from people, and they would link them. It was almost like a Pinterest style thing. And that was really valued. That was a core community that had a lot of engagement with that. And I think that was a really interesting idea. That data is not around anymore, unfortunately. But I think that if you could set up some kind of interface that allowed people in a group to share recommendations or share information, then you could start to look at this social interaction when people make purchases. And I think that would be, I think that would be fascinating. Then the other thing that you were talking about is contextual. Like, you know, clothing is a really good example. I don't mention clothing a lot in here because people do not, clothing has a kind of a different, it has a different behavior because people try before they buy with clothing. So it's you know, because you cannot, it's very little clothing can just be bought off the shelf without looking at it or seeing it or trying it on. So I don't talk about clothing here because I think that try before you buy is central to the clothing experience. We're never going to be able to get around that. The other aspect of this that would be kind of interesting is to understand which items actually need to be seen and felt and have a more immersive experience, because it might be that, you know, you can buy, you know, a 12-pack of black socks off the shelf. That's no problem. They're cheap. And if they're not exactly what you want, you'll probably still wear them until they wear out. Whereas if you're buying something like a camera, or you're buying, you know, I don't know, a suit or something like that, you actually need to see it and try it out. And you need a lot more information about it. And sometimes the information you need needs to be more immersive. And so that might be the place where AR, VR can help, is to take the products that you actually need a more experience with and create a VR environment for just that. So for instance, if you're buying a lamp for your living room, maybe you need to see how it looks in your actual living room. Or if you're, you know, buying an item of clothing, maybe you need to have some way to see how the material drapes, or some representation of it on a person, to see how it looks on a person whose body is similar to yours. But yeah, I think those are all really interesting questions.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think we also have a question from Peter.
Oh, thanks for interesting talk. Amazon was one of the leaders in personalization, and yet in your talk, you basically talk about users in general, what they do, how they work, what they prefer. Does it mean that Amazon is not really interested in personalization anymore? It might be that, in fact, users are essentially different. When you're summing it up, it's just like apples and oranges, right? And you don't get much sense. But if you look specifically at how the user behave and how they buy by clusters, maybe you get some exciting revelation. Or maybe you just tried and it didn't work. So anything related to this personalization?
Oh, yeah. So this presentation, so we are a research group, so we are not representing what Amazon actually does. And also we're not inside of Amazon search. So I think when you're talking about Amazon and personalization, you're thinking of like when you go to Amazon.com and you search for curling irons, you know, it's taking into account who know, you know, your personalization information that it has. And I don't know anything about that. So since I don't work in that.
No, sorry, Vanessa, no, I mean, you're processing data from people, but people might behave differently, right? Yeah, and they might behave in clusters. I just wonder whether you tried that, or you might not have enough data.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So even in this experiment, so these are, so in the cases of a lot of this work, these are small crowdsourced studies. So we don't have, none of them were done on log data. So we don't have a way, for instance, to identify, that would be actually a good thing. So you're right, where we're going is to try to have some way to evaluate quality from the log data, and then maybe segment people into cohorts based on what their perception of quality is. That would be super great. Since we don't have a ground truth to do that, we haven't been able to do it, to measure it. The other thing is that Amazon's Choice, which is the part of Amazon that we do work on, the badge is not personalized. So when we talk about what we're doing for Amazon's Choice, if you look at that wall of search results, Amazon's Choice picks one and says, this is a pretty good one. We want that thing to be high quality, but since it's not personalized, then what we're really trying to do is just make sure it's visible on the front page of the results. So we're optimizing for that. But I think you're absolutely right that it would be ideal to sort of segment people according to maybe some of their, like maybe it's just as a matter of identifying which particular attributes this segment prefers over this one, or the source that people prefer over this one. Like maybe some people look at expert reviews and really value that, and so they're going to want those products. Other people look at customer reviews. I don't know. I think that's a really good outcome, and we're just not there yet because we don't have enough of an understanding of quality to quite get that. But I agree that that's super interesting.
Nice opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Garrett.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the great talk, Vanessa. It was very interesting. Just one thought on that conversation between you and Peter right there. I would be very interested in children as one of those segmentations and how they interact with Alexa and the searching, and particularly with the idea of the pairwise and the pointwise, because they won't necessarily have the mental capacity to keep up with the pairwise, I would suspect. So it'd be very interesting to see that. But my question actually was on the idea of these identifying the helpful sentences. In that section of the talk, when you were talking about it, a lot of the examples that you brought up as the helpful sentences from it would be what I would term positive in context. So, but not all reviews are positive, particularly those lower rating ones. So if you're looking to actually be representative with those helpful, wouldn't you want to include some of the negative criticisms as well in that?
Yeah, that'd be good. I wonder what would happen if Alexa started, saying negative things about products. I think you're right. I think with the helpful sentences, the thing to be careful of there is that, first of all, these sentences are extracted from positive sentiment reviews. And then second, that the products that Alexa will recommend are all products that have primarily positive reviews. So we don't actually recommend. So Alexa, the way that Alexa, because Alexa can only show one thing or two things, right? So it's not like on the search results page where you can show 20 items and people can browse around that and you can send them off and let them do whatever they want. In Alexa, you're showing them one or two things or maybe three. So we're carefully picking those so that those are things that people actually have highly reviewed. So it's not the case that Alexa is ever showing things that are poorly reviewed. In terms of truth, being representative, I think that there's a risk from a purely like legal sense. I think there's a risk of saying negative things that somebody has said in a review out loud on Alexa. I think that would be a significant PR and legal risk for the company. So they're unlikely to do that. They're more likely to choose the product where that isn't an issue so that they don't have to misrepresent a product by being positive about it. But at the same time, they don't have to say negative things because the reviews are negative. Back to your question about children, I think it's interesting with the length of the prompt. I don't know if anyone's done the study of how much voice Alexa can say. In my experience, so I'm not a child, but I have ADHD, and I have to say almost no. I want to hear almost nothing from Alexa. So like if she says more than about 5 words, those better be very valuable words, because otherwise I can't even process it. Like my brain will just be like, nope, and I will completely shut off. And it's to the point where it's almost annoying. And I don't know if that's representative of how people interact with Alexa. And I've also wondered if it has to do a lot with, you're hearing me blather on. I've been talking now for like an hour and 15 minutes, but I have ups and downs and prosody, and there's some kind of social interaction here. If I were a device giving the same talk, there's no social obligation, and there's, it would just completely be flat. And I think that makes a big difference in people's ability to even hear and process the information that Alexa is saying.
Sure. Just one real quick follow-up. It's not an actual question, just a suggestion, I think, on the idea of the representative sentences. Perhaps not just focusing on the positive sentiment, high rating ones, because oftentimes high rating reviews can also have negative sentiment. So maybe gathering some of those, because they're in theory likely to be less harsh or legally troublesome than like a 1-star review, could potentially be something to investigate.
I think they're looking at both the sentiment and the rating. So it's not just that they're looking at the highly rated stars. They're looking at to make sure that. So I'll tell you that anything that shows
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Anything that shows on Amazon has been pretty well vetted to make sure that it's
right. Yeah.
So
cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Right. Unfortunately, I have to actually go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was also noticing the clock. Yeah, sure. So Chanya, I'm sorry. But perhaps you can also follow up offline. Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks so much again for the inspiring talk. It was a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for joining the Academic Fringe Festival. And we will have in June some more talks from Julie Reddy and Monia Lamas speaking. So see you next time.
Okay.